Hi, and welcome to Cosmic Chats.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, we have the remarkable John Edwards with us. He is a writer and creative consultant. You might have heard his words on the Tom and Jerry cartoon. He is a freelance writer with Disney, and he is part of a new production company, LDL, a graduate of Carnegie Mellon University. Oh, there we go. Tartan Pride.
Yeah, I'm legit. I actually have the swag.
Wow. All right, well, let's get into the first question. How would you describe the taste of a banana to someone who's never had one?
I would say, I would start first with the texture because I think that's part of the whole experience. And I would say it's mushy, and that that's a tough thing to do because every word that keeps coming into my head is another taste-oriented thing, right? So the only thing I can think of is that it tastes like whiteness, not like Caucasianness, but whiteness.
Guilty?
Guilty?
You taste guilt?
No, not guilt. White. Taste white.
Don't white people feel guilty nowadays?
Oh, well, yeah, but I said not Caucasianness, whiteness, like the color, the pure color.
The pure color.
Yeah, and and it's because visually. That's why whenever you peel a banana, it goes from yellow to white. And so I'm thinking, my first thought would be it's kind of like a vanilla-ish kind of, and I thought, well, I can't say that, right? Yeah, I'm assuming that they don't have any taste reference, right? So I can't just use another taste thing, right?
It's all your imagination.
It's all my imagination. Well, it tastes very, yeah. I would go with the colors actually, and the colors and the texture to sort of create a sense of what it would be.
So basically, Skittles were right. Just taste the rainbow.
Taste the rainbow. See it exactly. Thank you, commercials. If TV and advertising will never steer us wrong, right?
Never. Apparently not.
Well, that's why I was very careful to say it was not Caucasianness because it doesn't taste like guilt. If anything, the beautiful thing about bananas lately is they're a very guilt-free food. You don't see very many fat people who are just eating nothing but bananas, right? No one sits on the couch binging Netflix, throwing down bananas. No, it's like
it would be hard to digest. They're quite slow to digest.
They are, but thank God for the potassium because as a runner, I love these things. They keep me from cramping up when I run. So
that's the excuse that all of the men have said. Well, I have it for the potassium.
Yeah. No, it's actually my latent homosexuality is the phallic imagery that really is just like, it does it for me. Oh,
moving on.
Is this a PG-13 show? Can I not say
No.
But
yes, it is. Yes,
This is late night YouTube when you can say anything, right?
No, absolutely not.
Bluetooth, what I'm done with.
No. No Bluetooth. Yeah. All right.
I can see the number of followers is like, get the guy off, pull him. He's killing the show.
That's assuming you make it on air.
Oh, snap. So you want someone controversial. You want someone who's going to say the things that everyone else is thinking. Oh, no.
I want people to go into a cosmic state of consciousness where they feel like they are united with the person who's talking. All right. When did you have your first existential life crisis as a child?
As a child? See, I was thinking about that. I don't remember having one as a child. I remember having one as an older person, even as like a teenager, Okay,
let's talk about that.
And I think my first one was was actually when I got my first job. And while I was excited to have that first job, and I worked in fast food like so many people do, like my daughter actually just started working fast food. But it was that moment of realizing that I was no longer a kid. I wasn't fully a kid anymore. I couldn't just go home and let mom and dad pay for stuff or, I could do stuff for allowances. And that was pretty much it. I had no responsibilities. Let's face it. I just went to school, came home. But now it was like I had responsibilities outside of my house that weren't just to my parents to get, to take out the trash or whatever. I was now answering to all these people I did not know, I would get to know. And, I had to go somewhere. I had to wear, the fast food clothes that they're horrible. They're always, for some reason, polyester. I don't know why, but they are. Yeah, I think it's to break your spirit. Actually, is why they do it.
So
It'll be
polyester
totally
breaks
ours
your
now.
spirit.
But yeah, and so as much as I enjoyed it and I loved having my own money, it was that idea of I have to be somewhere now in addition to just being around the house or going to school. And so there was a certain, a freedom, a certain easiness, lightheartedness to life that kind of went away when that happened. And after a while it sort of weighed on me a little bit more. And I just sort of processed it. I was fortunate because where I worked, while it was, again, it was a fast food first job, not anybody's, not something they would point to as their a pinnacle moment, but I was working with a bunch of my best friends from school. So there, it kind of cushioned the blow, but there were times where I thought, oh man, I got to like work now. It's not just about turning in homework or hanging out around the house watching TV or doing whatever it was I was doing. I had to be responsible and I had to answer to other people and deal with the public in a way that I'd never dealt with before. And so it was sort of like, yeah, I've lost my childhood in a sense when that happened. I don't know if most people think about their first job in such terms, but I would say that was the first one I can really think of where it really shifted how I saw who I was and what the world was like around me, because it substantially changed at that point. So
Was there
it's been
this
changing ever since.
feeling of ominous looming doom?
Fortunately not. I think the worst part of it, I'm not much of a doom and gloomer anyway. I mean, I've put up with some, or not put up, but I've endured some things that are pretty heinous. And even then I wasn't really so much like, oh my God, my life is over. It's just like, wow, this is a big problem. Let's set about fixing it. I mean, that's kind of where my focus goes. So I never really saw it that way, but it made me more thoughtful. It made me more pensive in a way that I hadn't been. And, sometimes having those thoughts, it's heavy, and you begin to long for your child. You begin to realize just kind of how easy you had it. And I think that's when I first really started to have those kinds of thoughts, as opposed to, really silly stuff now. It's like, hanging out with friends and playing and watching TV and, just getting homework done and stuff that seems so, just non-issue type stuff now. But that would have been it. That would have been the first moment, I think.
Were you
If
a
I think of
child?
anything else, I'll let you know. But
Were you a child that wanted to grow up?
you know what? Not really. I wanted to have my own place. That was always a big deal. Like, wanted to live on my own, but I never really thought beyond that, because I was very protective of my space in the house. My mom and I got into arguments all the time about the state of, disrepair that my room was in, because it was always a mess. And I always told her, I said, well, but this is my space. I can do what I want in my space. And if you don't like it, I can just shut the door and you don't have to see it. I mean, that was my answer to everything. Just shut the door. You have the whole rest of the house, but this is my space. So that was, but I didn't want to grow up. I just wanted to have my own space. I didn't want to leave the house necessarily. I just, I, again, had not thought it through so much, but as I got older, I couldn't wait to have like my own apartment, not so much all the rest of the stuff that came with it, but I just wanted to have a place that I could call my own. And part of it probably comes from being an only child. So I was very comfortable with the aloneness. I was never lonely, but alone, which is a very different thing. And alone is a very comfortable space for me. I can go for days and, not talk to anybody and be fine. I can keep myself occupied. And, and luckily with COVID and the quarantine and everything, that's actually been a very helpful perspective. I think I've weathered it a little better than a lot of people I know, just because I can kind of go into that. I don't see it as a space where I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to lose my mind. It's like, no, I'm just doing stuff, catching up on reading or working on the house or whatever. There's just always something that I can be doing. So
So how did you adapt when you found out you were going to have triplets?
No. It's weird. It was very weird when I found that out, because both my wife at the time and I had grown up as only children. So we didn't even have siblings. Like, we had no frame of reference whatsoever. And when we first found out, I remember we were in the fertility specialist's office, or the doctor's office, whatever, because we needed help, and we knew there was a potential that we might have twins, because whenever you have the sort of treatments that we've had, oftentimes, you get twins. And I remember seeing the ultrasound, and he was like, "Oh, there's one." And we're like, "Oh, yay." I was like, "Oh, there's another one." We're like, "Ah," and you begin to kind of lose grip of reality, because you go into like this state of shock, like, "Oh my gosh, there's more." And then we kind of, we were looking at each other, and then all of a sudden he's like, "Oh, wait. And he goes up, and then there's the third little dot at that point. And we, at that point, I really had no concept of anything at that point. All I remember is I stepped back and kind of leaned. They had like one of these little desks that were like built into the wall, like where you would fill out prescriptions or something. And I remember stepping back and leaning against it, like I needed the support. But I was so excited. I was literally knocked off my feet, pretty much is how you could say it, because I did lean back and actually kind of lean on the desk for support. But my first reaction was just joy. I felt like we'd won the lottery. I'm like, wow, we're special. This is amazing. This is incredible. I can't believe our good fortune, And it was in the morning. And so I went to work after our doctor's appointment. And a few hours later, I got hit with a migraine. And I think it was when it finally started to sink in, that defense mechanism was gone. And it was like, something in my head was like, you're going to have 3 and you have no idea what you're doing. You're still figuring out how to raise yourself. And oh my God. And I did. I told my boss, I said, I need to go home. I'm having triplets. And I went to bed. Because it was like, and so, but other than that, the weirdest thing was I never really felt worried. I was excited. I was always very excited. That's what I take away from it. I don't remember panicking or anything like that. We knew life was going to change, but we had been trying for like a year solid to have the kids. And so when we finally, again, we hit the jackpot, we were just beside ourselves. And then at that point, my life was all about fixing up the nursery and fixing up the apartment and getting it ready. So I was so busy, I didn't have a chance to really worry about it or be panicked. And the only times I've ever actually had little moments of anxiety were when I had just enough of a spare time, in between, sterilizing bottles or washing babies or whatever we were doing, to think about it. If I had time to think about it, and luckily there weren't many, I'd start to freak out. Like, what am I doing? I don't know what I'm doing. I'm gonna kill these kids, or I'm gonna mess them up. I'm gonna there's all these things, but that's rare. It was rare, and I think it was just, I don't know. I'm fortunate. I'm very fortunate that was the perspective I grew up with, because it could have been a real nightmare. I never woke up in a cold sweat, like, oh my God, what am I going to do? It was an adventure. These little creatures that I'm very, nervous. I'm going to break one, but they're so fascinating. It's like, I can't help. I want to play with them. I want to get down on the floor with them, and what are they going to do next? And that was the thing that stayed forefront in my mind, as opposed to all the things that could go wrong. Fortunately. And I'm assuming that's something that I got from my parents. I don't know where particularly I could point to, but I mean, it has to have been from them or my grandparents at the time. They were.
So your perception was shifted with, I better get into gear, and you decided to keep yourself really busy. You didn't really freeze that much.
Didn't freeze. Yeah, I mean, I didn't have time. And that's what I always told people. They're like, well, what, weren't you terrified, or weren't you nervous? And I told, because, obviously this is talking to parents who don't have three. They're like, oh, I can't imagine having three. What would you do? I didn't have time to think of, I had to do what we had to do. And I kept busy, whether I wanted to be busy, whether that was the plan or not, I just had to be. And then as they got older and I could afford to sort of, take a break, it wasn't 24/7. It was maybe, it was maybe 22/7, after a couple of years. I was just in that mindset at that point. It's like, okay, well, what needs to be done next? I've got a half an hour before they wake up from the naps. Like, what do I have to get done? And you just stay very task oriented, very, very focused on that.
Now let me ask you about your journey, your next perception change. So you got task orientated, you became very practical. And then when you had time, it was like the emotions came up. I can't breathe. And then you went through a divorce.
I did, and not a pretty one.
I don't know many that are.
That's true. That really is kind of a silly thing to say, isn't it?
The weddings are pretty.
The weddings are pretty. Ours was quite nice, I have to say. We actually technically had two. Both were quite nice. As a matter of fact, one even made it into, I think, Modern Bride. Our reception was actually covered in Modern Bride because the idea was unusual or unique receptions, and we had ours at a bowling alley. So, which was a hit. Oh my God. Yeah, I would have never imagined, we were kind of leaning into the kitsch thing, but it was a huge hit. To this day, people still come up and talk about that. But yeah, the divorce was a big change. Another shift.
So I would imagine your perception changed before finally getting to the divorce point.
It did. What had happened, I think, in the years since, in trying to process it, and even to some degree processing it as it was unraveling, I realized that I had sort of lost my sense of self, which not only wasn't healthy for me, but also was part of what doomed the relationship too. You can't have a partnership if you don't have two individuals, right? You can't just have one person behaving as a shadow to the other person. And sometimes when you have a very strong personality, particularly if it's kind of a toxic one, it sort of consumes the other one. And I think my therapist at one point said, you've been going along to get along because you want to keep peace. But at the end of the day, you sacrificed kind of who you are. And so that began a real journey to kind of get that back. And part of getting that back was realizing that relationship was over. It had to be over. And even though kids were involved, people talk all the time about, well, we stayed together for the kids. But in our case, I came to the realization that staying together for the kids wasn't doing them any favors. And it was a horrible realization because, it was a grand sense of failure. It's like, in order to help these kids, we will do better if we're not together. It's like, that's just so counter to the way it's supposed to work.
Let's talk about that perception. So
Sure.
The idea that one is, goes out into the world, gets themselves stable or financial elements, and then has this union, maybe has children, and the programming of that to be normal, even if you are like yourself in the arts, which has way more flexibility because you are around other people that aren't so called living normal. It's still there, embedded, right? It's embedded into the consciousness of one individual person filling up the gap, or you're not whole and complete. It's not the education of coming together, right? Union of two whole, or whatever people are happy with, coming together, that it's more beneficial for those two individuals that created other individuals to work productively apart. And when that hit you as a realization that I have been running, as in you, have been running on ideology, philosophy, thoughts that are actually hindering the well-being of other individuals. Did that also shatter your perception of other ideals you'd been raised with?
Good thought. It did. It did. I think shattered is actually a good word, but I think when you say that, people might assume, oh, then it must have been a real tragic, hard, you got to recalibrate, how you see things. For me at that moment, another really good way to describe it, that shattering was also like a breakthrough. Like I'd come to a realization that a lot of the things that I had tried to live up to, and I grew up in a Southern Baptist household, so that should tell you something right there. So you talk about tradition, convention, and all that sort of thing. But when that finally happened, when that shattering happened in my marriage, it was truly a breakthrough, and I felt free to embrace that. Hey, I need to figure out what's right for me and what feels right for me, and not worry about whether I'm living up to some other standard. And then it was when I fully embraced the idea that my parents' standards and the standards that you'll often see on TV, or from church or friends, or wherever you get it. That's fine for some people, but for me, it wasn't really my truth. That the last thing in the world I would want to do is get divorced. However, what was more important to me is that I do whatever's right for my kids, and coming to that understanding that leaving the house or leaving the marriage was actually going to be better for my kids. There was a moment, and I think the moment when I finally realized that I was going to have to say I want a divorce. I was in the living room, and one of my daughters came in, and I could literally see the tension in her shoulders. Like that was.
And how old was she at this time? How old was she?
They would have been, let's see, like 9.
Okay.
9 or 10. But and at that point they were even talking to it. I mean, they would give us, grief about, guys, you're always yelling. Or, it became so established that whenever we were together, within moments we would be arguing about something. The kids were actually making fun of it, And I realized that's not how I want them to be raised. This is not the environment I want them in. I don't want them walking around like with tension I can actually see. It's like, they're 9 years old. This is insane. Because at 9, I don't think I had any tension. I had nothing going on. But and my parents were still together up until my dad's passing this past year. So I was used to a certain stability, but that stability was with them together. And what was best for me was them being together and everything. For my kids, it was, both their mom and their dad, me and my wife, we needed to be in a happy, good, self-realized sort of place. And we weren't. We brought out the worst in each other, and it was horrible. And I realized that it's okay that we split in that case. You can make the argument, and I have, that, the marriage itself was a mistake, except for the kids. It was a wash. But realizing that the moment they were born, it was really no longer about my wife or about me. It was about the kids, and that's when I saw that, I'm like, okay, then this is what I have to do. This is my truth now, is that this environment has to change for the sake of the kids, to say nothing of my own mental health, which, improved after as well, after, the understandable conflict of the actual separation and everything. But
would you say that you had PTSD from your marriage?
Yeah, I would actually. It's interesting you bring that up, because I was talking with a good friend of mine the other day that I never had stress dreams before. And ironically, it was after the divorce, sometime after the divorce, I started having them, and they always involve my ex. I don't have stress dreams about anything else. I don't have the actor's nightmare. I don't have any of that, but I have a very specific stress dream that entails my ex-wife. And I would, it's not debilitating. I can still function and everything, but it's interesting to me that when I'm really in an emotional state, that I now have these dreams, and they're always about, my most stressful moment, is used in my subconscious to manifest all of this. And it's with my wife. It's my wife coming back and us being thrust back into a marriage, which is weird. And if any of our mutual friends see this, oh man, I'm going to have a stress dream tonight that she's going to see this.
Okay, well, let's move forward to that. I want to ask you a couple of questions.
But, it is what it is, and I got to face it. So if she sees it, I have nothing to hide. So we'll put it out there, and all of your millions of viewers will see this, and somebody will get the next.
Yeah, let's move into the next realm before I ask the second question. You then had a further real perception change when your ex-wife had an accident, and you had to come back to be the primary caregiver, and went through a very tough financial period with your children. However, you're comfortable to share about that.
Sure.
Let's talk about how that changed your perception even more.
Okay. Yeah. So, just a little bit of context. So, we had split. We were in the Bay Area at that point, and I'm in the Bay Area now. But because I'd been a stay-at-home dad and I didn't do computers or whatever, being up in the Bay Area, there wasn't a lot of opportunity for a guy trying to get back into the workforce. But I could pick up a phone and still get a meeting down in LA, because I was writing at that point still, and had done some work for Tom and Jerry, had done work for Disney, and had begun to establish myself. So I could make that work. And so I had to, I made the decision to move back to LA and get work, because I had to get on my feet. The idea was I was always going to move back up here, but I couldn't find work here. And one of the weekends that I was down in LA, I got a call from my ex-wife, or I got a text from my wife's boyfriend at the time. They and the kids had been at a church retreat, and she fell. It was kind of up in the mountains, and she'd fallen. I think she was sleepwalking or something. It was late at night, and had a massive head injury. She fell down quite a great span. I think they said it was about 50 feet. And most of it was like at an angle, but then like the last 10 feet or so was like a sheer drop. And she, and they didn't find her right away because it was so late and nobody knew she was out. That's why we think she might've been sleepwalking. So she was there for a while, and that was the problem, because she was hemorrhaging and all this sort of stuff. So luckily somebody found her when they did, and they called, and they got the emergency crews up there. But when all of that shook out, and this, she was in a coma for a while, imagine what you can imagine with this sort of stuff. And that was pretty much what she went through. She came to a few months later, after basically every doctor we talked to said, we're probably you're going to have to make some decisions about, life support and stuff. Well, she recovered enough that she regained consciousness and everything, but she's paralyzed to this day. And this was in 2015, I guess. So it's been, we're going on year 6 now. She's going to be paralyzed on the left side almost entirely. And if you were to talk to her, it's like talking to someone who's had a really severe stroke. It's hard for her to get the words out. Everything's working up there, but a lot of the nerve damage and everything means that she's going to be in a facility probably, from here on out. The recovery window has been passed. So whatever she's managed to regain is pretty much what she's going to have. That's how it's been explained to us. And so when that happened, he texted me. I came up, I literally got into the car and started heading, back up to San Francisco before I even knew the whole extent of it, because he had just texted and said, there's been an accident. You'll probably want to come up here. And so as I was driving up from LA back to San Francisco, I was kind of getting updates as I went and kind of getting the picture, bit by bit. So I ended up back in the house, taking care of the kids as the primary caregiver, because she was incapacitated. And and that's the way it's been ever since. So it's been essentially, a single parent situation. We go up, I take the kids to see her when we can. It gets tricky, especially with COVID and the safety protocols and stuff. So we can't always just go whenever we want to. She's in Oakland, which is, about 20 miles from here. Not far, but with the traffic, I'm kind of rambling about that. Sorry. But anyway, so she's nearby.
How did your perception change as a result of all this?
My perception changed in that I was numb, actually, because it was very unreal to me. And I think I came to adopt a very strong Papa Bear mentality. That obviously I was the dad. Of course I had that anyway, but it became just like hyper real in the sense that, I'm it, and I can't let anything happen to me at this point, because if I do, the kids aren't ready to be out on their own yet. They're getting close, but so it spurred a lot of, I think, awareness of my responsibility and where I had been falling down. Like I'd gotten really out of shape, my health was horrible, and I was kind of, I felt like I was working all the time or trying to make ends meet. And while that may have been true, I also was neglecting a lot of stuff that was also very important, which was my health, my mental health, and all that, which impacts everything. And it particularly impacts my, ability to be their dad, either as a role model or just, being physically able to, drive them around, go to school functions, and just be there and be cognizant and help them with homework or teach them whatever life lessons I haven't taught them yet, or that kind of thing. And I couldn't do it in the state that I was in. And I really had to shift out of survival mode, which is what I had been in since the divorce. I had to be more.
So you realized you were in a fight or flight state quite naturally, and that you had to take time to purposefully go into that relaxation place, which your previous perception awakening was when you found out you were having triplets, which was stay on task, almost living in that adrenal fight or flight response. And now your action was, whoa, I'm not going to be able to sustain this physically, to really be present for what these beings need in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. It was almost like it was a very different kind of shift, but it still came down to the same thing. Everything was focused on the kids, and realizing, what do I need to do in order to take care of the kids? Right. Before it was just, I have to just work, and not really think about what's going on with me, to a more, what I would like to think is a more enlightened state, where it's like, actually, I need to think a lot more about me. Because it's the old idea of, being on the airplane. It's like, you have to put on your mask first, otherwise you're not going to be of any use to anybody if you're passed out or whatever.
Right. Looking for sustainability that is functional and practical. So
I'm not feeling selfish about that either, and like saying, oh, I have to take time for me to go run or go work out or whatever. And it's like, what, you're just, that's not a luxury. That's what you do to be responsible. And there's a little bit of that. It's like, oh, if I have a spare moment, I should be doing something with the kids. It's like, no, they're fine. You'll get there. That, this is all part of that.
Now, that's a struggle that I would say, from limited experience in general, that the maternal female figure tends to have a harder time doing that. And there's lots of like self-care and take that time. But yet you had an awakening, and it was very clear that's what needed to happen. You needed to spend that time. Now you've learned a meditation. You see here, there's an ebook, Vedic Meditation Stories.
There you go.
That's available for anyone who's got unlimited Kindle for free, or, at a menial price. All of the donations of the purchase of it goes to the nonprofit. If you have the free Kindle option, then a number of pages that you read upon, the first few, goes towards credit for the nonprofit. And it's the
that's
only
cool.
publication that has true stories of people who learned the practice. And majority of them are people who would never have learned, but even more from the underrepresented groups. And part of the nonprofit's endeavor is to go into areas where meditation wellness is underrepresented, and that includes the elderly, right? Individuals in rehabilitation, like your ex, and even areas such as in relationships where we're talking about male, female, where men are abused and have PTSD and issues and not in an affluent situation, that there's not a lot of focus or attention there. And there's a gap.
Yep, there definitely is. And it's also, I think, particularly hard. I mean, it's hard for everybody, but I think it's also uniquely, there's a unique challenge with men, is because men aren't supposed to talk about, men don't get abused. There's that whole idea of there's a certain amount of shame and it's unfair for women and men. There's a certain amount of shame associated with being the victim. No one wants to admit, oh my gosh, I got to get out of this, and this has happened to me, and I need to start taking charge of it. And I think it can be particularly difficult for men too, because I think a lot of people kind of dismiss it. Women get blamed as the victim, and men just get dismissed. So I mean, they both of them are not treated well, but in different ways.
Want to have equanimity, right, of all people.
Yeah.
There are shortcomings and strengths of each individuals, and
absolutely,
we are wanting to go to areas, predominantly though the underrepresented are those who are not wealthy enough or haven't been exposed to meditation to be able to awaken and shift consciousness. Now, we had a teaching that you hosted in your home for people to learn meditation, and you learned the practice there, which your shoulders went down as a result, and then your children have been able to learn meditation. The challenge for everyone is a regular practice, which, there's always support. But if you could tell me, that particular weekend was very intense of meditation, in and out all day, right? What you noticed, a shift in not only your physiology, but your consciousness from then delving deep into a practice that can give the body such deep rest.
I've noticed that definitely. And because one of my biggest concerns when I first started was I'm going to fall asleep, because I can sit on the couch watching TV with the kids, even now, and I will just fall asleep because I'm chronically sleep deprived. And they give me a hard time about it. It's like, oh, we'll start a movie, but Dad won't get through it. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to sit here. I'm going to be quiet and still for 20 minutes with my eyes closed. I'm not going to make it through. But I did, and I do. And I actually feel more refreshed. And it's sad that I'm still falling asleep on the couch. If I'm not meditating and I'm still for too long, I'll, the lids will droop and they'll think. But if I'm meditating, I make it through. I have yet to fall asleep while I'm meditating, no matter when I've done it, whether it's been in the morning, whether it's been in the evening or whatever. I'll set the timer, and I'm never woken up.
You're not supposed to set the timer.
Well, I got to do something because my eyes are shut. I got 20 minutes.
Okay, we're going to do a quick lesson now.
Okay.
Everybody, those of you who are watching, let me tell you why. So those of you who don't know about the practice that he does, when there is a timer, no matter how quiet that sound, it is an alarm, and it will alarm you out of your state of consciousness and will awaken you. And we want the physiology, the body, the mind to bring in that deep state of rest and slowly into the waking state, because there's a shutdown. And when there's a shutdown with an alarm, what that does is it puts you into fight or flight again.
Okay.
So we don't want this separation of this is me when I meditate and how I feel, and then the world, I hate you all.
Right. No, that's a good point.
So how do you manage the time? Well, you slowly open one eye, you have a quick look, and then you go back again. All very easy and effortless.
Okay.
Right?
I will do that if you. So I'll put that disclaimer out there. The timer was not Paula. That was me. I'm getting getting away from the teaching a little bit though, but I will now.
But that's why
Now I will do it differently from here on out.
there's a refresher, and it's easy to forget. But there's also this idea of, I'm supposed to do it this way. I'm supposed to be like this. Just as if you fall asleep in this meditation practice, it's fine.
Mm-hmm.
It's your body simply saying, I need to do this for this period of time. You're still going to get the same deep rest. It's still going to happen, right? Because you're not missing out, because this is not a concentration technique. A concentration technique, yes, you ideally don't want to fall asleep. Here,
Right.
this happens, so be it. It happens. That's it, right? And so it's these ideas of how we're supposed to be in meditation.
Mm-hmm.
Just as how we're supposed to be successful and have a job and have a marriage.
Oh yeah, because I'm
Even
not
if
doing
the
anything
marriage,
the way people are supposed to do it.
right, it's unhealthy, right? And so the desire is for union, right?
Mm-hmm.
To have union. And when we meditate and you connect inward, right, the body can also get this deep rest. But the thoughts are simply processing, and they're there anyway. Just as the bad marriage was there anyway, whether you pretended it was good or not.
Yeah.
It was still happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, my next question I want to ask you is, now as a parent of 3, 2 girls, and you've raised them and you're a writer,
Mm-hmm.
how have you changed your writing? Shift the closed-minded perception so that people who start watching what you're writing will not have to go through perception shifts like you did for marriage and feeling shame when you're attempting to uphold the best for your children.
Yeah. So how is it, just so that I make sure I'm understanding the question. So it's like, how did that affect my writing?
How in the future with what you're writing in your production and moving forward, is your shift of perception and consciousness that you're willing to break down old molds that are not healthful?
Yeah. I think part of it is, I take writing, what I write now, I feel much more responsibility for what I write, even though, in the past, a lot of what I write in what I write now still is, family friendly, kids oriented material. And before it was like, I want to write something that my kids can watch, basically, or read. And some of the stuff I've done has been for them specifically. I mean, the dedications are even to them. But then realizing as I get older that, not everything I write is for them, but I am, to be truly the writer that I want to be, the artist that I'm supposed to be, I have to realize that there's certain things I'm going to write that are not really for them, and maybe they won't get much out of, and that's okay too. I mean, there are things that I need to do as part of a bigger picture, and that even though some things I may write may not mean anything to them or may not be for them, what they still see is that dad's, fulfilling himself, right? Fulfilling his potential, or working toward, being the best he can at this profession, at this art, at this craft. And that what they'll take from that is that that's how they should go, through life as well. Whatever it is that they end up doing, and we're still figuring out what they want to do, but they should do it, as fully as possible, and not just because someone expects them to do it, or to do it in a way that meets expectations. But, if I have one daughter who wants to be an artist, it's like, well, then you make the art that speaks to you, whether it's sculpture or oils or digital or whatever the topic matter is, whatever. First and foremost, you have to do that to fulfill your own potential. And I think that's where my writing has changed. My approach to writing has changed, is I gotta be the best I can be as an example, so that they will go out and pursue that sort of actualization again. And whatever, I don't know that any of them will go into the arts. I mean, it would be great if they did, but we still have no idea where everybody's going to land, but I still want them to have that pursuit of, approaching it as this is a fulfillment. This is very much a part of who you are and not just something that you do. It's something that you are. And I think in the arts, a lot of times it's kind of easy to see the two, integrated. And in more conventional jobs, you work 9 to 5, you come home, and there's a literal break, and you're this different person when you come home a lot of times. And I don't. I mean, I'm the same guy doing the same job 24/7. It's all very much, John Edwards, the writer, looks very much like John Edwards, the dad, or John Edwards, the guy volunteering at the school. It's like I take the same approach, the same sort of perspective with everything, and I feel that sort of integration is the kind of thing that these days makes me feel happy, and allows me to go through things like COVID and divorce and whatever, and realize that while it may be tough and while it may be frustrating, that integration, puts me in the best possible place I could be to deal with all of it, and gives me a sense of, I will get through it. I will overcome it. I don't know what it's going to look like, but there's never a question of, I will be enough to handle this. And so that's sort of a long, rambly.
Bringing all of who you are and training them to be
exactly.
all of who they are, not decompartmentalizing themselves for better or for worse.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this has been fascinating. And those of you who want to know more about the projects John is doing, it's all in the description. You can follow him along. We would like to remind you, thank you so much for participating in this cosmic chat. And we will see you soon. And don't forget to like
so much. Oh, sorry. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome.
All right. Bye.